Let's move on to the class then. Let's see where we left off. We left off talking about these two verses. And thus I saw in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three was a third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. Now remember, this is accumulation of, we had an army of 200 million men on these weird horses that are described here, and out of the horses proceeded fire and smoke and brimstone. And what's interesting about this is that some people take this so literally, they think this great battle is going to be taking place with actual horses. I read one guy that actually was so literal that he thought there was going to be actually 200 million men on actual horses. And that's how impractical some people get with taking everything literally. Most of the interpretations today say these horses were some type of weapon, maybe tanks or helicopters or something like this. But each rider is on their individual horse. So not only do you have if you take it literally, not only do we have 200 million man army coming against, say, Israel in the Battle of Armageddon, but you have 200 million horses. So it's pretty hard to get any type of literal interpretation that does make sense. However, it would be possible for an army of 200 million people to get involved in some type of World War III if we had a worldwide war at this time. So, that is within the realm of possibility, but the spiritual interpretation is entirely different. The fact that when the disciple reaches enlightenment through the third eye and begins to put forth his message, he stirs up a lot of activity. And the number, instead of 200 million, really means a big number, is what John was trying to emphasize. It's a huge number that he can't really identify the specific number, and that's what the Greek actually indicates there. And the number that is with the disciple when he activates the third eye and begins to teach, begins to go forward, he gathers an innumerable company of angels, so to speak, as it's worded in the book of Hebrews. And it uses that same number. When it says innumerable, that's the same number that is involved with John using identifying the 200 million.
So are these are like angels then coming to the rescue on their horses that we're connecting with?
Yeah. So when the disciple goes forward, he's really not alone. He gathers, of course, people from the physical plane, but on the spiritual plane, he's got all of heaven rooting for him, so to speak. So he's got, and the way it's actually meant in the Greek, now the translators translates it 2 times 10,000 times 10,000, but it's really 2 times a number of an innumerable number, a number that he cannot name, times the number again. In other words, the heavenly hosts are tremendously large. And I would guess that involves not only this earth, but the whole universe. When you look at the whole universe together and all of the higher lives working to move the universe up in vibration as a whole. And that is truly a number that you can't even number. That's how big the number is. So you have, when the disciple goes forward, he has basically what he's saying. He has all heaven upon his side to go against the forces that are trying to keep us on the material side. Now it talks about the riders on these horses. The riders represent the innumerable and intelligent beings, as well as the advanced entities upon the earth with whom the disciple has contact. Now, these invisible beings, it says, have breastplates of fire and of jacinth and of brimstone. A breastplate is a piece of armor that protects the warrior from injury. Now, within himself, then the disciple goes forward and he has this influence from all the heavenly hosts on the other side. And this gives him the protection of a breastplate of armor. So the breastplate, it says, this protects him from injury, especially spiritual injury, and protects him from the sufferings and distress that affect regular humanity. And this is an important point, and this is a problem that affects many advanced disciples, is they are very empathetic toward humanity, and the fact that they identify with them so much it almost paralyzes them. And this is particular aspect of the female part of ourselves that we don't want to ignore. We want to acknowledge, but not let it overwhelm us. Now let's pick on Vivica. I think she's still here. She's very empathetic. You tune in to the sufferings of people and things like this. How do you deal with it so you don't let it overwhelm you?
Well, I deal with it that way, that I think of that everyone have their destiny and their karma. So I'm trying to imagine that what have they done to suffer that way.
Yeah. And so are you affected sometimes by other people's distress, that it kind of distracts you? Does that ever happen to you?
Yes, of course it does. And if somebody's really sad, it affects me. I can feel it, like, and the tears are coming, but then I'm trying to, okay, like, yeah, it's difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and this is particularly hard for females because they're more empathic than us guys are. So but us guys still have our feelings too. So so this is a distraction the disciple has, and he has to develop the viewpoint of the observer, so that he can still function even though he's aware of the suffering and the problems of friends, humanity, people he's working with. He's aware, but he doesn't let it interfere with going forward. And this is part of having that breastplate of protection that that's talking about. Now, this protection that he gets from the breastplate is by threefold, it says here. First, by fire. And this comes from a Greek word that kind of not only signifies fire, but light that comes from the fire itself. So he gets enlightenment, and this helps to neutralize this. And the second is jacinth stones. These are normally really dark blue in color. Now, blue is a symbol of the higher mind and divine thought, which is kind of compared to light itself. So the disciple has to not let the emotional self pull him away from focusing, keeping centered on thought. And because sometimes, well, what I do when I feel a draw of a pull of other people's emotional problems, I have to force myself with my mind, because the mind, remember, has power over the emotions. The emotions don't have power over the mind unless the mind goes to sleep. If the mind is awake, the mind can assume power. And so sometimes the mind, you got to say, mind, okay, we have these emotional things going on. Let us maintain the viewpoint of the observer. We're aware of them, but we don't let them distract us. We don't let them make us change our course. We stay focused on the higher purpose. And so we have to keep that old mind awake and in charge of what always makes sense and is in alignment with the last thing that you have received from your higher self. And then brimstone. This comes from the Greek theodos, which it is derived from the word theos, which means God in the Greek. So where you see the word fire and brimstone in the scriptures, it's kind of scary for these fundamentalists to read, but brimstone actually is derived from the word God. So brimstone is really like a fire from God, so to speak. And so being in touch with the God within is the final thing that gives you the breastplate of protection. Thus, we see the disciple here is protected by light and love and power, as expressed in the Song of the 144,000 that we often say together. Then it says, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions. That's interesting. Now, when people hear this description, the regular interpreters say, well, what kind of equipment would be the head of a horse that looks like lion and so on? But they're missing the point entirely, is that these horses are like compared to lions, and who is the lion of the tribe of Judah? Anyone?
Jesus.
Right.
Jesus.
Right. Jesus in the book of Revelation describes the Christ as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And what's interesting about the lion is it's the most feared of all the animals. If you visualize you being thrown in a cage with any animal on the earth, the one that you would be most scared to be thrown in with would be the lion. Okay. Now, it's funny how Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah and also the Lamb of God, the most feared animal and the most unfeared animal. Nobody's afraid of a little young lamb, but everybody's afraid of a lion. And when he came, people either saw him as a lamb, somebody that they did not fear, somebody that would help them, somebody that could heal them, or they saw him as a lion, somebody that was to be greatly feared because he would take away their authority. And
So one point on that, the lamb shall lay down with the lion. So that must mean that they come together and achieve a union where your strengths come together, where you're soft and you're ferocious at the same time.
yeah, that's a really good point, Curtis, because when we have the will of God done on earth as it is in heaven, it's like the lamb and the lion coming together, and the fear is no longer there. The lion will eat straw like the ox instead of eating people.
But it doesn't eat the lamb.
Yeah. And so it's really an illusion. In other words, it's a time when illusions are dispersed because the authorities were afraid of Jesus because of illusion that they were in. They really had nothing to be afraid of. I mean, look at what he was saying. If they were into what is true, there was nothing to be afraid of. Yet they were really afraid of their own thoughts that they had were in circulation in their own heads. And out of the horse's mouth issued fire and smoke and brimstone. And by these three were the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. So the third part of men killed, men symbolizes humanity, or humanity symbolizes the human nature, the lower nature. The lower human nature, a lot of it can be used for good. When it's mastered, it can be directed for an intelligent purpose, just like the lower emotions. Say, romantic energy. Romantic energy can be very selfish. People have killed over love, but other people have done great things over it. So if we can take, there's about a third, especially a third of our lower nature that is destructive, and about 2/3 that is usable. And so when it speaks of killing a third of humanity, it's talking about neutralizing that third part of ourselves that takes us in the wrong direction.
So the
And
third part of our
yeah,
action, thoughts, is that what you're saying?
what's that?
Third part of what we do and think and how we feel is the slayer of our selves.
Yeah. You think it's just like we get back to the third part of the hosts of heaven were supposed to be drawn away by Satan, and they created all the problems of the world, is the way everybody thinks that reads the book of Revelation. And this is interesting. A third part of the human nature has to be slain, so that that fallen third doesn't keep us away from the spirit. Okay, smoke here is substituted for jacinth. We had the same symbolism as we had earlier, except we have smoke instead of jacinth, which was blue. But the symbolism is the same. except smoke is symbolic of thought that is not comprehended. So you have the smoke is symbolic of revelation and understanding that has to be revealed. So in addition, the smoke comes out of these horses, which is really a revelation, and it covers the people and hides the reveals covers a hidden revelation. And when people disperse that smoke, then they see how to lift up the lower nature into the higher.
So is smoke kind of like a cloud then?
Yeah, yeah. Cloud. We're going to be talking about the clouds later because smoke and clouds are the same thing.
Okay.
Between humanity and the presence, the higher revelation, and the individual and higher revelation is what is described in symbology as smoke or clouds that that hide this. And the reason it's hidden is you cannot absorb the higher light until you are ready. So you have these barriers, these clouds between you and the presence, and eventually the clouds have to be dispersed. But the clouds actually protect you from being exposed to too much heat too fast. Just like if you get in a sauna and you have the heat too high, it's very painful. But you can get in a sauna and start with a low heat and gradually turn it up and endure quite a bit of heat, a lot more than you could have if you just entered it really fast.
So it's a buffer zone.
Yeah, this is what the smoke does. It prepares you and protects you from getting too much light and heat from the spirit too fast. Okay. Their power then is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails are like unto serpents and have heads, and with them they do hurt. Okay. So the disciple goes forward with these 200 million horsemen, or an indefinite, a great number, too large of a number to number, is supporting him from the hosts of heaven. And in their mouth, it says, their power is in their mouth and in their tails. The mouth represents the words that he speaks, the things that he teaches, and the power of their tails represents the communication on a level of feeling. Okay. And so when the disciple goes forward to do his work, his words coming out of his mouth and the effect of the feelings generated hurt people here. It says, they had heads, and with them they do hurt. And again, the Christ is a supreme example. His words, he taught his words, and it hurt the people that had their own idea as to what the words meant. And they said, you have come to destroy our law. So his words hurt. Okay. And then he also hurt their feelings in the fact that you have come to destroy our authority, our way of life. And so their feelings were hurt. And this is what happens with disciples when they go forward. Anyone that goes forward with extra light, look at Galileo, same thing. Look at the most enlightened person you can imagine on the earth today, or a handful of them, and you will see that they're they're offending the powers that be. they hurt the powers that be. When the powers that be are hurt by somebody, look at that person and figure this person must be a disciple, because he's stirring up the 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 powers that be. The powers that be just do not like them. They feel hurt by this guy. Okay, they feel threatened by this guy.
But he wasn't really intentionally antagonistic. He said, "I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill." He didn't come to say, he didn't say, "Yeah, I'm going to tear down every belief that you have." I'm going to be a lion, a tiger here. But he tried to assuage their disbelief and say, "I'm just here to fulfill the law."
Yeah, and it did, but it didn't matter. They still felt threatened. He tried to be as gentle as he could. And when you deal with a very emotional person, if there's if you try to give them advice to try to improve their life, have you ever noticed that no matter how gentle you are, you try to show them love, appreciation, but you need to make this one little change, they will often react like they are very hurt. Anybody have that happen to them before?
Yeah,
condescending.
I've had that happen. But, I can't help thinking, I didn't realize it at the time, but over the years I've come to realize that when people react that way, they're catering to their astral self. They're catering to their emotions that take over, because that's a very difficult thing to overcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Overcoming the emotional world is perhaps the greatest hurdle that we make in our evolution, because
I agree.
the emotional world is so powerful. And when you're in the emotions, if you have your buttons pressed, it's very difficult for the average person to respond positively. And even for an advanced disciple, if somebody comes and criticizes him and tells him he's full of it, even many advanced disciples have a really hard time handling it in a harmless way. Now it says their power is in their mouth and in their tails. Power comes from the Greek word exousia, which is translated and it actually means authority. So what's interesting is that as the disciple goes forth to do his work, his authority is in his words and in his passion and feeling. And this is what was interesting about Christ, who is a great example again. They came to Christ, the outward authorities of the time, and says, "By what authority do you say this?" They wondered. And the scriptures talk about how the Christ taught with great authority, yet he had no recognized authority at all. He was just kind of a regular guy. And all of a sudden he comes and teaches, and his acts and his words and his passion gave him an authority that people recognized, and they they just couldn't understand where does this guy get his authority. And so this will be one question that people will ask of a true disciple. So if you see any disciple or any person being innovative, and people will say, "Who do you think you are? Where do you get the right to do this?" Then that guy is probably on the right path, because he's stirring up things with the inner authority, because the greatest authority is truth itself. And when the disciple speaks pure truth, the truth itself has an authority that is just recognized by others that are sensitive to truth. And those who are not sensitive to truth see that the guy has authority that wasn't given to him by any earthly person or group. And they don't understand that. And it really bothers them. And that's why they came to Christ and says, where do you get this authority? Where? And I can't remember the answer that Jesus gave one time. He says, answer this question, and then I'll tell you where I got my authority. And they couldn't answer the question. I can't remember what the question was. Anyone remember? But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Answer me this question, and then I'll tell you. It was something about John the Baptist. He says, was John the Baptist the prophet or not? And they didn't want to answer because if they said yes, he would say, well, why aren't you following him? And if they said no, they would, the people would esteem John as a great prophet, and they would, they would lose some of their authority. So they refused to answer. And then Jesus says, well, then I won't tell you where I get my authority from.
It was a trap question.
Yeah. He was really good at, they tried to entrap him with questions regularly, and he turned the tables on them every time. It would have been fun to be in there and watch a master like that deal with the authorities of that day. Now, the authority is also in the tail that and likened to a serpent, and the serpent represents wisdom. So the heart center, remember, is a center of love and wisdom, is the seat of all the emotions and the wisdom aspect. And this is another thing that really stirs up the authorities of the day, is the wisdom represented. And wisdom itself is a recognized authority. So the disciple goes forward with great authority over those that are sensitive to soul contact, to the inner contact. He speaks, and the words he speaks are a tremendous authority just by themselves. But it will not be an authority to those that are not sensitive to the inner contact, that needs the outer gods as their gods. These people will be affected negatively and try to prevent the true authority from being revealed. Okay, any more comments on that?
Yeah, remember we had a lot of resistance from the church. People would ask us, "Who do you guys think you are that you can just interpret the scriptures the way you see fit?"
Yeah, well, what's a prophet said about this? Was what they will often say.
We
And
heard that a lot. Yeah, the prophet hasn't really spoken on that. I was yeah, in a car full of people who were selling real estate and going around checking on properties, and I was telling them that we were doing this mucusless diet with Arnold, with Earhart or whatever his name was, and that we were eating lots of fruits and vegetables. And boy, they really got in a dither over that. Well, the prophet hasn't really said anything about that. We think you're crossing lines you shouldn't be crossing just by experimenting with diet.
yeah, yeah. And when I was younger, now the church is kind of mellowed on that idea because there's so many Mormons getting on more nutritious and vegetarian type diets that they've kind of mellowed on that. But when I was younger, they back in the 70s, they were so strict that if you taught about just eating whole wheat bread instead of white bread, you were frowned upon. And so now it's no big deal, but back then, so that's a great part about this evolution is when truth is introduced, first of all, it's highly resisted, and then it's finally tolerated, and then when it's finally accepted, the authorities think, whoa, we believe this all along.
They take credit for it.
Yeah, or they try to take credit for it.
But they almost kicked me out of the car for discussing vegetarianism. It was really weird. I really stirred up a
Well,
hornet's.
they think that's a new religion.
Yeah. And what's interesting, this is one of the things pointed out in the book of Revelation. I can't remember if we talked about it or not, but the people that were against Jesus when he was here, many of them have been reincarnated as fundamentalist Christians that preach Jesus out the yin yang more than anybody else. So they have taken an entire twist in the fact. Now they may not be preaching him correctly, but they have embraced in a future life the guy they hated in a past life, which is quite interesting.
Regarding what you're saying about no authority, I can give you an example of one time when I was doing a construction survey, laying out a new school being built, and there were some problems with things not fitting that the contractors made, and they were all in a tizzy that like they thought they were going to have to tear things down and do this and that, and I stood between the architect and the general contractor, and I worked out a solution for him that was very simple. And I had no authority, but I come from inside of myself to be a mediator. And I think that when we realize that we do have more of influence than we really would suspect, I think we can make great changes and help people.
So did they accept your change?
Well, my change wasn't specific. My change was the fact that we should take a logical approach to this problem and realize that we're not building a bridge here, that these problems are very small, and they accepted that.
Yeah, if you're like in that situation, if they saw that your change would work and solve a tremendous problem, then that truth becomes a powerful authority. They say, well, yeah, this will actually work. Let's do this.
I had another example. One time I was working on a Saturday in Laguna Canyon, California. We were laying out a custom home for a guy who I was working for, and he didn't have access, didn't have a road, and there was a guy next door who across whose property we needed an easement, and they were at odds with each other, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but I worked out a solution, and before the end of the day, since it was my birthday, I had them both singing "Happy Birthday" to me.
Yeah, you can have authorities arguing, and especially if there's a problem, and if you are just a nobody, but you see a solution and come forward and present it, if they can see that it works and it's to their benefit, I mean, you become the greatest authority possible at that point, because you're just presenting the truth. Now, if somebody feels their feelings are going to be hurt because their solution isn't accepted, then sometimes a person will reject the truth, even though it destroys them or hurts them. But once they see it is the truth and they accept it, I mean, there's no more powerful authority than the truth itself.
Well, I say that when you put yourself in the state of pure reason and you align with pure reason, there's no disputing what might come out of it.
Yeah.
Well, I have one thing to say, and that's why I enjoy this book. I think this unveiling book I think it's the best thing you've ever written. And I'm not done. I'm reading 3 Tibetan books. And when I read them and when I read this particular book, I get the same spiritual vibration from this as I do from the other books.
Well, thank you, Curtis. That's because I'm channeling DK. You didn't realize that?
I didn't realize that. I thought it was Master M, but no.
just joking, you guys. So
You got
don't take it too seriously.
You got 200,000 billion trillion horsemen back in
Yeah,
you.
I got 200 million
Billion trillion
yeah, maybe more on my side,
universe.
along with the rest of you guys there.
Yeah, right.
Okay, we have the host. We have the host of heaven with us if we are on the side of truth. Is basically the message there.
Well, you might have John the Revelator backing you up, letting you know, hey, this is what I'm really meant to say here.
Yeah.
But nobody else seems to understand what he was saying.
Yeah, it's interesting. I really admire the wording of this book. It's so complex yet simple in some ways. But I mean, just imagine if you had an assignment, write a book with symbology like the Book of Revelation. Who could do that? I mean, I don't know of anybody on the planet that could write something like this. It's a fantastic description and wording. It's very powerful. And when I remember back when I first read it, I didn't understand anything in it, except I did come away with one thing. I thought, this is the most profound thing I've ever read. I want to understand it. And that's all I got from my first reading, basically. But I did get that. I did realize there was truths in there that are to be discovered. Okay, we're going to just read one more thing for seed thought for next week. Verses chapter 9, verses 20 through 21. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, neither can see nor hear nor walk, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. This sounds like something right out of a fire and brimstone sermon, but it's not quite what appears on the surface. And the question is, do people in our age still worship devils and idols? Aren't we beyond that? Maybe not. We'll talk about that next week.